In this week's episode of the Artist Soul podcast, we're going to talk about long range planning and setting goals for your art business. Welcome to the Artist Soul podcast. Each week we explore what it means to be an artist, finding your artistic voice, developing your artistic skills, and how to build a professional career and business around your art. Now, please welcome your host, artist and art teacher, Rod Moore. G'day folks, and welcome to this week's episode of the Artist Soul podcast. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Rod Moore. I'm an artist and an art teacher, and of course, your host here at the Artist Soul podcast. And I want to talk to you about something today that is really important in developing an art career, an art business, and transitioning from a part-time hobby artist into a full-time working professional artist. And that is long-range planning. Now, this is not a sexy topic at all, right? This is something that most artists probably don't want to give consideration to. In fact, let's be real, most people in the world don't really want to give consideration to long-range planning for success because we've all been sold on this myth of the overnight success. The media loves a story of somebody who came out of nowhere and became successful overnight, right? And they love to put those stories forward, and it's in movies and TV shows and newspapers. Those stories make the headlines. And so what happens is we tend to buy into this idea that success can happen in an instant. And perhaps it can, but only in very, very small percentage of people, right? It's so rare. This is why the media latches onto it. It's so rare that it's not worth even considering as a possibility. Now, if it happens for you, or it's already happened for you, then good luck to you, right? It certainly didn't happen to me, and I'll share my story with you. But my message here today, and what I want you to really take away, is that to build success in anything, any type of business you would build, or anything, if you want to be a great guitar player, it's not going to happen overnight. It requires long-term planning. And I'm going to talk about the next decade, the decade coming up, and why now is the time you want to start putting together a plan for the next 10 years, a plan for the next decade, right? So a little bit about me and my journey, and I don't want to make this podcast about me. I want to make it about helping you to really achieve the success you're looking for in your art career or your creative career, right? But just by way of context, a little bit about me and my background. So 2006, I did my very first painting. And, at the conclusion of doing that painting, I was in a $2 store buying a coffee mug. I turned around, I saw all these colors, brushes, canvases. My heart started to go like this. I'd love to be an artist, right? And so I bought everything. This little voice in my head said, just buy everything, go home and have a go, right? So I did. I did my very first painting in 2006. And then I did what most people do after they have a go at something new like that. I assumed I had no natural talent or ability. Right? So I packed everything into a box and it went under the bed, not to be looked at for some time. 2008, I was in London on business. I walked into a gallery for the very first time and I stood mesmerized by all these J.W. Turner paintings. And that's when I got the calling, right? I'd always been a creative person. I'd been a musician and, just a really creative kid, very vivid imagination. I was always creating something, right? Doing magic shows and, you name it. But in 2008, I walk into a gallery and this intuitive voice, as I stood there mesmerized by J.W. Turner's paintings, this intuitive voice said, you're going to spend the rest of your life as an artist. And I fought that for a couple of years, right? But it wasn't long after that, I came home and my wife and I were renovating an old house at the time. My parents had come to visit. And out of my mouth came the words as I announced to them all and myself that I'm going to spend the rest of my life in a career in the arts, being an artist. To their shock, horror, but maybe not surprise because I always had a new idea of the week. And so that was just around about the 2008 period. I fluffed around with watercolor and struggled until November 2010. And then what happened for me in November 2010 was I did my very first oil painting. And that was the thing that got me completely hooked, right? Oil painting. And I fell in love with painting with oils and later on acrylics. And I still enjoy watercolor, but it doesn't make up the majority of my practice. And so November 2010, and I'm recording this just a couple of weeks before November 2019. So that's a 9-year journey it's been for me. It took me 9 years to get to the place where I have been able to build a six-figure plus business around my art. Now, let me just be clear, that's not selling my art, although a percentage of that income is definitely from the sales of my art, right? Probably 10, 15% of my income is based on the sales of my art. The rest of it is based predominantly around teaching art to others. And in the teaching art to others, I have multiple streams of income built into that sort of side of the business, right? So I've been able to build a business around my art, and we're looking to expand that in the next couple of years into productization, merchandise, licensing, and things like that. We've got a plan in place to do that. And why am I telling you all this? Not to tell you how great I am, because it's not about me. It's about the fact that it took me 9 years, right? 9 years to become an overnight success. Now, the interesting thing about those 9 years is that there was 1 year I did virtually nothing. My wife had got sick and she'd left me behind in Geelong. She moved up here to the Sunshine Coast where the climate was warmer. She needed that for her health. And we were trying to sell a house down in Geelong, and that meant keeping the house spotless clean, and the studio, which was really a closet, right, that I was using, had to be packed up and kept neat and tidy. So for nearly a year, and then we moved and trying to get resettled up here, there was nearly a year, sort of halfway in between those 9 years, where I did nothing at all, right? So it's really 8 years. And for the first 4 or 5 of those 8 years, I was very part-time. I had jobs that I was working and never happy in a job at all. But this is what you have to do to build something. And so I would squeeze into every available hour, wherever I could, painting, learning to paint, and starting slowly to build an art teaching business. And pretty much work 7 days a week, pretty much do some work 7 days a week, even today, right? So it's only been the last 3 years that the business has really taken off. So it's gone flatline for 6 years, and then the last 3 years it's gone up exponentially. And that's what happens in most cases, is what I've come to find, because of the law of compounding effort. I'm going to talk about the law of compounding effort in a future podcast, but I want to keep this today focused on the real point that I'm trying to make is it's a long-term game plan. If you expect to go from where you're at right now, unless you're already very well established and already doing consistent regular sales or generating consistent regular revenue, then it's going to be a long-term game plan. Really you want to look at it as being a decade-long plan to get yourself established, because I don't believe I've arrived at success, even though I'm doing more than 6 figures. I don't believe I've arrived at a point of success. I feel like I've built a foundation from which to launch myself into success. And so the first decade is really about building that foundation. The second decade is then about leveraging that and scaling it up to greater levels of success and really enjoying the rewards of that success then. It's a long-term game plan. There's very few people who pick up a brush today for the first time and 2 years later have got a consistent and reliable income. Now, I'm going to keep using that term over and over, consistent and reliable income, because that's what I'm here to talk to you about. I'm not here to talk to you about how to make a one-off sale or how to do a pop-up gallery and sell 20 pieces of art and then do nothing for the next 6 months. I'm talking about every week we know we're going to have income coming in, every month income coming in. Over the course of a year, it grows, from month to month. And it's consistent and reliable and growable, right? So I'm not going to talk to you about things in this podcast that are one-off things to get a bit of cash in the door. Like, we're not going to talk about going and getting a grant for $5,000 from the local government, because what happens when that's gone? Right? What happens when you've spent that money and you've fulfilled your obligations to that grant? You're back at zero, right? And I'm not about that. I'm about building a business and building assets within that business that the income continues to grow over time and becomes consistent and reliable. And that's the only way to achieve success as an artist or in any business, right? Is to have a business model, business systems, business assets that you can leverage for an income. Now, I know artists don't talk this way, generally speaking, right? But this is the way we need to start thinking and talking if we're going to enjoy success from 2020 and forward into the future. And I'll share with you why in another podcast, but everything's about to change for artists and in fact, most people in the world. So we need to build consistent and reliable income. So, there are some artists who have run into a bit of a hot streak where all of a sudden their artwork is in vogue, right? And they're getting sellout exhibitions and it lasts for 2 or 3 years and they make six figures. But then what? Right? When they all of a sudden are no longer in vogue, they're no longer flavor of the month and somebody else is, what happens to their income? If they haven't built business systems, business assets that they can leverage for income over the long term, right? That income's just going to disappear. And that's happened to so many artists out there. I can't tell you the number of artists I've met over the last 9 years that have bemoaned the fact that it's not like the 1980s today, right? I used to sell really well in the 1980s, well, great, but that was 30 years ago. Hello, things have changed. The world's changed. It's moved on. If you used to sell really well in the 80s, but you're not selling well now, you need to rethink the way you go about selling your art or any aspect of building an art business, right? It is just not like the way it was. And it's never going back to be like the 80s, right? So we need to continue to move and adjust and grow and develop our thinking in line with what's happening, especially with technology. And again, this is a topic for another podcast. So it's a long-term plan. It's a long-term process. You can't get there overnight, I don't believe. Now, there's always an exception to the rule. And again, this is what the media latches onto and promotes. And it creates this myth that you're going to be discovered and become an overnight sensation. And yes, a few people do. But the vast majority of professional working artists didn't get there that way, right? They don't have natural talent. They're not lucky. They've developed an artistic talent and skill set through a decade of hard work, right? They've built a sales system around their artwork and other revenue streams through a decade or more of hard work. It's a business that requires work, right, to be a professional artist. It doesn't matter if you're painting or creating pottery or jewelry or writing hit songs, or you're a poet. It doesn't matter what the modality is. The point is that it's not something you get in with talent and just do not much and make money. I haven't found the person who's doing that yet, right? Put no effort in, was born with natural talent and does minimal input and gets maximum output from an art business. I just haven't seen it. And if you've seen it, please let me know who these people are. And I'd love to chat with them and find out what really went on. So it's a decade of hard work just to get established, I believe, and then it's another decade to really reap the rewards. So you've got to think about it as a bit like if you're a farmer, right? You don't go out to the field and say, hey, where's my crop? Where's my bananas on the banana tree or lettuces, or the tomatoes, where are they? Field, hello, farm, where's my... No, you've got to cultivate the soil. You've got to sow seeds into the soil. You've got to tend and nurture the garden, and you've got to wait for for it to take root and effect. You don't walk out into the field every day and we've got a little sprout coming up out of the ground and then rip it out and say, well, where's the carrots? You've got to allow a gestation period before you can reap a harvest, right? And we all know this. Everyone knows that there's a gestation period. There's cultivating the soil. There's, sowing seeds. There's watering the seeds. There's nurturing and tending and pulling weeds out along the way. We all know this. This is nature's way, right? And this is the way of success in any endeavor as well. And it's just funny how when we decide we're going to be a full-time professional artist or creative person or entrepreneur, how all of a sudden we expect that the laws of nature, right, no longer apply. We become impatient and we expect instant results. The reality is, even if you're just building a business, an online business, that's still going to take you a considerably longer period of time than what the brochure says, right? What the advertisement said, build 30 days to a six-figure income. Yeah, some people do it, but the vast majority don't. And if you're trying to bank on you being in that 0.1%, then you're thinking about it all wrong. And look, here's the thing. If it does take a decade, who cares? If you are genuinely passionate about being a creative person, about creating artwork, whatever your art is, if you're genuinely passionate about that, does it matter if it takes a decade or 2 decades or 3 decades? I think not, because if you are genuinely passionate and driven to create your art, you're going to be doing it in 10 years' time anyway, right? So just embrace the fact that this is a lifelong plan. It's not an overnight one. It's not a 1 or 2 year plan. It may be a 5 or 6 year plan if you're extra good or you've already got great artistic skills. Maybe it's 5 to 6 years. It was 9 for me. I had to learn to paint in those early days. So you just got to have that attitude. Now, here's the thing. About 30 years ago, I went to the very first Tony Robbins event in Australia. And it was an interesting time. It was an interesting event. But the one thing that was a big takeaway for me that I'll never, ever, ever, ever forget, he was talking about goal setting. And he said that, most people, they dramatically overestimate what they can achieve in 1 year. And then they dramatically underestimate what they can achieve in 10 years, right? So we think we can do so much more in 1 year than what we can actually do. But over 10 years, we underestimate how much we can actually do. And the reason is the compounding effect of your efforts. Every effort, if you're strategic and you have the right plan that you're working towards and you're consistent and you're dedicated and reliable and you do the work that needs to be done, then every one of those efforts builds upon the previous efforts. So over time, you build momentum. Over time, you leverage the efforts from the early days. And that helps to grow exponentially your results. So within 10, and this is what accounts for, like, look at my YouTube channel, right? I've got 17,000 subscribers. I started in 2012. And for most of the time between 2012 and now, it's gone flatline like this. And the last couple of years, it's taken off, right? Same thing with my income and my business results. It's been flatline for the early years, and then it just kicked up in the last 2 or 3 years, right? That's because of the compounding effect of being in business and sticking at it long enough, right? Today I get paid. One of my income streams is I get paid for work that I did back in about 2012, 2013. So back then I created a video course called the Get Started Painting course. And to this day, I get paid for it pretty much daily or weekly. Since then, I created 20 or 30 courses and projects and so on. And the compound effect of each new course that I add grows the income, right? But that takes time. You can't do that overnight. Now, I'm not suggesting you need to create courses around your art. That's up to you. There's lots of different ways to monetize your art. But think about just as an artist, even just putting together a really solid body of work and developing a really strong voice so that people know, hey, that's a Rod Moore painting, right? You don't do that overnight. That takes a good 5 to 10 years to really develop a strong voice and be able to put out a solid body of work in that strong voice, right? That becomes recognizable as you. It also takes a decade at least to build an audience around your work. So that involves buyers, collectors, fans, and we'll talk in another podcast about the idea of 1,000 true fans, right? You're not going to gather those together overnight. It's going to take a period of time. So Tony Robbins, we overestimate what we can do in 1 year, and we dramatically underestimate what we can do in 10 years. And I found this to be true. My biggest regret, right, if I cast my mind back to November 2010, and I did that very first oil painting, my biggest regret is that I didn't get a big enough vision of where I could be with my art in 10 years' time. Right, November 2010. If I just didn't understand that I could build a global successful business in the next decade. I didn't have that faith and belief at that point. I had the passion for it, sure, but I didn't have absolute certainty that if I just keep going and paint every day and stick at it for a decade and build a business system around it, that I could be doing 6 figures or 7 figures, right? At that point in time, I didn't have that level of thinking. And it's it's not a regret. If I could go back in time and change that, I would say, hey, Rod, younger you, get a bigger vision, right? Develop a massive vision around your artwork and what you can do with it. If you look at someone like Weiland, who, if you don't know him, he's a good artist who is also a marine conservationist. And he's used his artwork to help fulfill his mission of being a marine conservationist. And, that's a big vision. And I'm not sure whether he started with that vision or he just brought that in later on. But that's the sort of thing I'm talking about here. If I'd had a bigger vision in 2010, I'd be a lot further along than what I am right now. Okay, and that's not to diminish what I have done or the success I've built. And you should never do that. You should always celebrate where you're up to and be grateful for it. But I know that if I'd had a bigger vision, my business would be 3 times as big right now. Okay, so why am I sharing all this with you? Firstly, to let you know that success in an artistic endeavor is going to take longer than what most people think. It's going to take a good decade to get established and more to build, substantial success and reap the harvest from it. Now, if you don't want to hear that, like if that's making you feel upset or sad or whatever, right? I'm sorry. I'm just here to share the truth, and there's always an exception to every truth, and perhaps you can be that exception, right? But I wasn't the exception. And most of the people I know certainly aren't the exception. The one thing you don't want to do is get 10 years down a track and not actually build a foundation because you haven't followed the right advice. You haven't put the right things in place. You haven't had the right plan and the right strategy, right? And so what I see is so many artists going about building their art career, especially online, completely wrong. They're doing it all wrong, right? Don't follow what the majority of artists are doing, because the vast majority in 10 years' time, when we hit 2030, are going to be disappointed. You need to follow somebody who is actually in the trenches right now, making it work, and has a big vision for what's going to happen in the next 10 years. So we overestimate 1 year, we underestimate 10 years. Here's what you need to be thinking right now, right? In 2030, most of you listening to this are going to arrive in 2030, in a decade's time. We're going to end up there anyway, right? Most of you, hopefully, will still be artists, right? You'll still be producing artwork. However that looks, what modality that is, who knows? But most of you are going to still be producing artwork. If you've got the true passion to be an artist, if it's really in your heart and soul, right? That's why we call this the Artist Soul Podcast. If it's in your soul, you can't help but create. Right, so you'll be there in 2030. You'll be still creating something, right? The question is, will you have built a foundation for success? Will you have built a business around that artistic endeavor that's put you in a position to really start to reap a harvest? That's the big question. And how is that going to happen? It's not going to happen by chance or luck, and it's not going to happen by following the majority, right? Because the majority of artists have got it wrong. Earl Nightingale, in his groundbreaking audio recording, Lead the Field, he said, one way to create success is to look at what the majority are doing and then do the opposite, because the majority usually have it wrong. So if you look right now at artists on social media, what are they doing? They're joining art groups with other artists, and they're posting up their paintings, their latest painting, and getting likes and pats on the back and well done and a few comments. And then they post 1 or 2 paintings up in online galleries, and maybe they sell a painting here and there, but they're not building careers out of it, not consistent and reliable, sustainable income that can be grown over time, right? That's what I'm about. So therefore, most have got it wrong. You need a different way of thinking, right? You need a strategy and a plan and the right mindset on how to make it happen. So one of the most important things you can do as we head into 2020 is to start saying, okay, if I want to earn an income from my art, I need to step into being an art business, right? An art entrepreneur. This is not a career. Nobody's going to come along and pay you a salary for you to produce your artwork. Most cases, right? And if you're looking for a salary, there's no point listening to my podcast, right? Because I'm not here to talk about it. I'm here to talk about how to build a business that impacts the world through your art. So you have to accept the fact that you are going to need to be in the art business, an art entrepreneur. And with that comes a whole lot of considerations, which we'll talk about those in another podcast. I've got a lot that I want to share with you on these podcasts. So the most important thing for you to do right now is to say, okay, at the time of recording this, it's the 21st of October, 2019. We're only 2 months away and a bit away from the end of this decade and the start of a new decade. And there's never been a better time ever to plan out a 10-year plan for yourself than at the start of a new decade, right? So it's perfect time for you to sit down and go, okay, what am I about? What's my art business going to be about? What is the message I want to share with the world? You know, what do I want to say with my art? Who do I want to impact with my art? Who do I want my buyers and collectors of my art to be, my fans, right? Who's going to make up those 1,000 true fans that we know is what you need to be able to build a sustainable art business? This is the time to start thinking about that and to develop a vision for your art business, right? Now, there's an artist, I think her name's Iris Scott, and she is a finger painter. So she paints in acrylics, I believe, with her fingers and does these amazing artworks. When she started out, she started sharing her artwork on Facebook and selling her artwork for $50, right? In 2018, she crossed the $500,000 mark. And in 2019, it's likely that she'll do over $1 million. There's an article written about her in Forbes magazine. You should go and check it out. On her webpage, on her About page, she introduces herself, but she makes two very important statements that her mission, she doesn't use the word, but this is basically what it is. Her mission is A, to get her work into museums so that she can show a younger generation of female artists that it's possible for females to be in museums, not just crusty old master artists who are all men, right? So that's part of her mission. And the other part of her mission is to raise the consciousness of people in around the world to paint animals, not eat them, right? So she's has a plant-based or a vegan-based mission as well through her art. And this is what I'm talking about. This is a woman who's got an incredibly big vision of where she's going. And she started off selling $50 paintings on Facebook and is now doing over $500,000 a year or more and possibly crossing the $1 million mark this year. You need a big vision. Weiland had a big vision, right? Or has a big vision. He wants to use his artwork for marine conservation purposes. And go and check him out. So now, do we need a big vision like these people, or can we get away with a vision that's not as big as that? I don't think it matters. I think what's important is that you have a vision of where you're going in the future. You know what your art's about and why you want to create art and want to share it with the world. And you start to develop a 10-year plan, right? That's what's important, that you start giving it some consideration and you start to really think it through, right? And develop a plan for yourself. And that plan can be, like how you're going to improve your skills, what education you're going to get, what mentors you're going to find and follow. And it could also be about how you're going to create different streams of income around your art. And this is going to be different for every single one of us. You need to find what suits you and your personality and your ability, and then explore the ways that you can turn your art into assets that can be leveraged for income streams, right? And the more you can do this, the more over time you can grow your income until you build a solid foundation. By 2030, every single one of you listening to this podcast, if you follow the right advice, the right mentor, and you are consistent and deliberate and strategic in how you go about building your art business, by 2030, we can all have a solid foundation that generates, a better than average income. And from there, you can launch yourself into greater heights of success. So we're 2 months away from the start of a new decade. That gives you 2 months to develop a 10-year plan, right? To develop a vision of where you can be in 2030. And remember what Tony Robbins said. We overestimate 1 year. We dramatically underestimate 10 years. And remember what I said, Rod Moore, right? If I go back to 2010, November 2010, I did my first oil painting. My one regret is that I didn't think so much bigger. I should have got a 3 times or a 10 times bigger vision of, at that time, all I was thinking was, I'd love to be a full-time artist and not have to go to work, right? Not have to have a job that I hated, but to be able to just create. And that was what my vision was, right? Well, I achieved that 3 years ago, but I didn't think big enough. I could have had so much greater impact in the world by now had I had a much bigger vision. So my challenge to you is to really spend the next couple of months prior to January 1. Don't leave it like most people do, that January, New Year's Eve, they make all these resolutions. This is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about finding a mission that makes sense, building a vision for your business, and then committing to it. Because through the law of compounding effort, you can get there. right? No effort, no results, of course. But if you make consistent, deliberate efforts following a strategic plan, then the law of compounding effort will help you get there, right? But you need a big vision. You need to couple that with a mission of how you're going to serve the world through your art. And then you need a plan, and then you need to get to work, right? You can do it. Anyone can do it. This is not reserved for a few people. Anyone can do it, but you have to change your thinking. You've got to stop following the masses and do things differently, right? And you can do that. So I hope that's been of help. I'd love to hear your comments, your thoughts, and your feedback. Look out for what I'm be launching very soon. If this type of information resonates with you and you want to hear more, right? I'm going to launch very soon a monthly newsletter, which will be a deep dive exploration of how to build an art business with multiple streams of income, and really how to think about it, what the mindset is, what the strategies are, and give you some insight into what I do on a daily, weekly, monthly basis that is growing my business substantially, right? So that's going to be called Artist Prosperity Network, or Artist Prosperity Monthly Newsletter. And look out for it. It'll be out in a few weeks, the very first edition. But my plan is really from 2020 through to 2030 is to publish a monthly newsletter, which will be 20 to 30 pages, jam-packed full of how to become a successful working artist, right? And how to enjoy prosperity as an artist. Too many artists are stuck in lack mindset, right? They don't see the abundance all around them. There's no lack of money for the arts. There's no lack of money for you and your art business. It's only a lack of your ability to be able to tune into how to attract that to you, that success to you, that money to you. That's all it is, right? And so now in this new Artist Prosperity Monthly Newsletter, I'm going to share with you a deep dive on what you need to do, how you need to think, what strategies you need to employ. And keep in mind, the next decade is going to change everything. We're about to enter the AI, artificial intelligence, and robotics and virtual reality decade, right? When it became mainstream. And during this decade, the way people will experience and buy artwork is going to change forever. My belief, but I think you'll find it's true. All right, my name's Rod Moore. I'm a contemporary landscape artist and also the founder of the Learn to Paint Academy. Go and check us out and leave a comment. Please share this podcast. I want to reach out to as many artists as I can. So if you can like it, share it with all your artist friends, leave a comment. I'd greatly appreciate it. And look forward to chatting to you next week on the Artist Soul Podcast. Cheers for now.